While I think it was a good idea to include the siblings of Franz Joseph in the Empress, because he was not an only child as he seems in Sisi, what they did to Maximilian is just unforgivable in my opinion. It was a good idea to include the siblings, to humanize Sophie by telling the story of how she lost her daughter, and to show the brothers of Franz Joseph in the story, giving screen time to little Ludwig, who is always overlooked in adaptations, and giving Maximilian an important role in the story as he was close in age to Franz Joseph, and the brotherhood was certainly an interesting one. But why on earth did they think it would be good to make Max a traitor and his brother's rival for Sissi's love too? Why? I get that this sibling rivalry meets love triangle trope is popular in TV, but when it comes to historical characters, at least have the decency to, I don't know, do it with a fictional brother, not ruining a real historical figure. And anyway, for an interesting brother rivalry, why do you have to make them have a common love interest? When it comes to power and inheriting crowns, it is quite easy for brothers to become rivals. And there have been several historical TV shows that delved into that subject in a very intriguing way. And it could have been done so in The Empress too. The two had differences in real life as well. They disagreed on several things. Franz was conservative, while Max shared similar liberal views with Elisabeth. And the two were actually good friends, while Max was in love with his own wife, Charlotte. So, based on this, the series could have included unfounded jealousy from the Emperor's side without Max actually doing anything wrong, or at most platonic feelings that always remain under the surface. Also, while it is not impossible that Max would have wanted to be Emperor instead of Franz, or thought he would do the job better, it is just impossible that he would have ever thought of going openly against him or committing treason. And how can he get away with that alive? How can his supporters get away with that alive? Why not just show Franz and Max having arguments about politics, with Max being hopelessly trapped in the second son role? And if you really want to make Franz and a brother of his rivals for Sissi's love, why should that brother be Maximilian? The second youngest brother, Karl Ludwig, was actually rumored to be the brother Sophie and Ludovica wanted to match Sisi with, while they wanted to match Franz with Helene. Again, I must mention the 2009 Sisi series, which portrayed Maximilian so well. His true friendship with Sisi was so great there. It also portrayed the complexities of Sophie's character so perfectly, how Maximilian was her favorite son in secret. I find it quite weird and stupid invention from the Empress that they made up a fake romance story between Sophie and the Prince of Baza, which didn't even add anything to the storyline. And it was even hinted that he might be the Emperor's father, when in real life it was Maximilian, who was rumored to be illegitimate. And it was said that Sophie had an affair with Napoleon II. And since Max was her only child fathered by the man she loved, he was the one she loved the most. Even though it was Franz, through whom she could fulfill her ambitions, her second-born was her favorite. Is this not interesting enough? Did they really have to make up some fake stuff instead of this? Lastly, I have to talk about the costumes. Last December, watching Sisi, I wouldn't have thought I would say this, but I actually liked the costumes in Sisi better. Not that I find them great, it is just that they are still better than the Empress. It is clear that while both costume designers obviously looked at how the real 1850s fashion looked like, they deliberately went for a modernized version of that. In Sisi, it means cheap modern fabrics and a bit modernized silhouettes and dresses that look like ball gowns ordered from Wish. But in the Empress, it is a complete mess. They modernize things in all the bad ways. Modernizations should at least serve a purpose in the story, should be in line with the characters. But in the Empress, why does Sophie, who is supposed to be the most conservative woman in the show, wear the most modern looking dresses? Why is it she, of all people, who has the most modern hairstyle in the court? Why is Sisi, who is supposed to be the most liberal, modern and rebellious woman here, the only one with a correct contemporary hairstyle? You get what I mean? And what is this on Helene? And why does Sisi wear ugly modern clothes instead of gorgeous 19th century gowns? Don't the 1850s and the 1860s of all decades in history look amazing with our 21st century eyes as well? Come on, it is literally the era that is so often replicated and featured in cosplays. I get that there are historical eras that had fashions that look just ridiculous now, but our era in question is the exact opposite. I mean, look at the costumes in the Romy movies. Just look at them. They are just beyond amazing. Yes, they had an obvious 1950s influence. Yes, they were not perfectly accurate because the ladies just kept wearing evening dresses during daytime as well. But they were a very good mixture of what looks great on screen in an artistic way and what the fashion in Sisi's youth actually looked like. And the 2009 miniseries was even closer to historical accuracy. It had amazing costumes that were indeed like the gowns Sisi and her contemporaries wore, and they looked just amazing on screen. Now, don't tell me this or this is not better than these new cheap modernizations. Now, don't get me wrong, I do find period costumes with a modern touch amazing sometimes, when done correctly. Marie Antoinette was just perfection, the Bridgerton costumes are marvelous, the Great has costumes that are in line with the sarcastic parody style of the whole show, only loosely based on history. There are several examples of this let's modernize period drama costume thing done well, but I think the Empress costumes are a big fall on the face. Now, after being disappointed in both new Sisi shows, I have started to think about how exactly a new Sisi series could work in the 2020s. There is no denying that you shouldn't try to compete with Romy, and therefore you better go for a darker, more realistic look on her story rather than for a romanticized version. Also, it is clear that in 2022, to sell the story of a person who lived 200 years ago, you have to do certain things to make the story interesting and relevant today. The creators of both Sisi and The Empress were clear that they wanted their shows to look at Sisi's story through a modern feminist lens. But here is what I think. You can look at certain historical women through a feminist lens, and you can make their stories interesting and relevant today while staying true to their character and their historical realities. There are several good examples of that. First, you have to choose your character well. Not every woman in history can be depicted in a feminist way. Some were just not like that. And then you have to choose what means you can use to make her feminist. What both shows got wrong, I think, was that the most feminist trait they gave to Sisi was that she was sexually libertine in the show. First of all, we could argue whether that's a feminist trait at all or not, but secondly, it is not the tool you should use in a Sisi story, I think. The thing is, the real Sisi did have several kinds of modern traits. She was ahead of her time or feminist in several things. So she is a good choice for a modern feminist heroine in a historical drama. She was special and ahead of her time in so many ways. Her story is actually very good material for a TV show. There are several things about her that make her so popular till this very day. There are several things that make her relatable and interesting to many people even today. And I think neither of these new series actually utilized that fact. Sisi was modern and unconventional in several ways. She always longed for freedom, being free to live her life as she wants to, and the strict conventions of her time and position tormented her. She wanted to raise her children herself, and she was deeply hurt when her mother-in-law took them away from her. Several tragedies and traumas made her relationship with motherhood quite complicated, in an age when it was not conventional to talk about your struggles as a mother. She would have wanted to have control over when and how many times she got pregnant, but in her times it was not possible for her. Although her marriage seemed to start as a fairy tale, in reality it quickly became clear that she and Franz were very ill-suited. It happens today too. You quickly fall in love, you think he's the one, then with time you realize how different the two of you are, so you break up or divorce and you move on. It happened to her too, but for her, it was not possible to break up or divorce, and she had to live within the boundaries of her marriage, and she suffered greatly because of that. It is a bit funny that TV shows about Sisi always focus on the great love between her and Franz, which didn't exist, instead of Sisi's rumored other loves, which I think would make a much better screen content. A secret forbidden love with Andrashi or something like that. But that's just my opinion. And there are several other things about Sisi which make her resemble a 21st century person more than the women of her era. She was probably the first fitness lady, she had a whole gym in her rooms, and she was a great fan of the beauty industry, and she spent a lot of time and money on skincare. She, just like many other women then and now, was very afraid of aging and losing her beauty. Also, she was a passionate traveler. She loved to explore new places and cultures. Today it is normal and she would be just one of the millions of tourists, but back then it was a bit of a groundbreaking thing from her to travel so much just for fun. To have good content for a CCTV series, the historical events of the era actually help a lot. During Franz Joseph's early reign, there were a lot of things going on in Europe and also in his empire. You really don't have to make up much there. There were just so many things going on. The politics of this era is a very good TV show material. And to understand the emperor's challenges and situation better, flashbacks could be used to show even earlier events of his reign. I think that could build his character arc quite nicely. To see that he came to the throne in a quite special way, and he had to deal with revolts and revolutionary wars from day one. Both the Empress and Sisi operated with a few flashbacks, but I think neither of them could actually make them work story-wise, so this flashback thing could be done much better. It could also be used in Sisi's case, maybe to show flashbacks from her happy, free childhood, to contrast her unhappy, restricted days in the palace. Also, if you don't find Sisi's life and the political events intriguing enough in certain time periods, a good way to spice up the story would be to include the stories of the siblings. As I mentioned, Franz Joseph's brothers can also provide good stories, but not just them. Actually, Sisi's siblings had very interesting lives. It's full of good screen content material. I already mentioned the romantic love story of Helene and her husband, but her other siblings also had eventful and sometimes quite scandalous love lives. So if you want some steamy content in your Sisi series, there you go. You can also spice things up with the upstairs-downstairs concept that period dramas often use. Victoria did this very well, and while it followed the events of Victoria's life and the royal family's life quite accurately, the show also operated with several fictional characters who worked at the palace. These servants were also well-developed characters with interesting storylines, so this upstairs-downstairs concept could also be used in a Sisi series. Well, I guess I will have to wait and see if any of the upcoming seasons of these new Sisi shows give me what I would like to see from a Sisi series. Until then, I guess the 2009 miniseries will remain my favorite, which is quite funny because that miniseries is nowhere near the list of my favorite historical miniseries. I have always found it a quite mediocre production, but the sad truth is that the more new Sisi productions I see, the more I appreciate the 2009 miniseries.